Welcome to Intro Psych Sessions, the second season, where I will rethink my entire Intro Psych course from beginning to end, asking friends and experts to help me figure out how to put it together in a way that implements recommendations and integrates the skills and knowledge that I want to give to my students. And who better to join me on this adventure, co-hosting the series with me, than Dr. Regan A.R. Gurung. This is Intro Psych Sessions Season 2, and I hope that these conversations will help you as you think about your students and your own intro course. Let's get to it. And now, a word from our sponsor.
Endless distractions, overbooked schedules, information overload. Students face so many barriers to being fully engaged with their schoolwork. That's why Macmillan Learning's Achieve for Psychology gives you the tools you need to keep them focused on your course, before, during, and after class. Whether it's the exclusive author-created content, captivating footage in our Introductory Psychology video collection, or the self-evaluation of our goal-setting and reflection surveys, Achieve helps students stay focused on the course and makes it easy for them to tell you when they need extra help. See for yourself. Go to macmillanlearning.com/psych sessions 2023 special for an introductory tour today. Macmillan's Achieve for Psychology, engaging every student, supporting every instructor, setting the new standard for teaching and learning.
Welcome, Danae Hudson, to this conversation about teaching my Introductory Psychology course. Danae has just dropped in with Regan and I, and we don't really know what we're going to be talking about yet, but we're going to figure it out shortly. Welcome, Danae.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Well, we have had, just so you know, we've had a few conversations already with folks. The whole point of this, as I think I mentioned to you, is that I am overhauling my intro psych course. And so it's a very selfish endeavor to bring my friends together and say, help me. And what's important to you, what should be important to me. And then to throw some ideas out that I've been thinking about, and to have you all say, yes, that's great. Or have you thought about this? Or no, I hate that. You haven't thought this through. So anyway.
Now I see why you asked me in here.
Oh, the last part. Yeah, good. So, we could go a lot of places. One of the things I was talking to Regan about just before we started was, man, will all these conversations come back to content? Could we actually have a conversation that doesn't, wade into the content waters for intro psych? So I'm going to start us somewhere that's not content, but for sure, and it's fine if we do, we'll probably get into content. Now, remember, Danae, you teach these big sections and I teach these little itty bitty sections. How big is your intro psych class?
330.
Yeah. Oh, perfect. I'm exactly 10% of that. So
there you go.
Yeah. So here's what I want to talk about. And I think it's riffing a little bit on some stuff that Regan and I were just speaking about, which is what should we be doing with students in class for the intro psych course? And we can all just kind of riff on that. What should we be doing with students in our class time? Because we want them doing some stuff. I know that you have, you use Revel and you use Revel, right? Yeah.
Yes.
And you're okay. Yeah.
I would think.
Yeah. I was like, is there a weird rule around? I mean, anyway, but no, so you use Revel. So you have your students doing pre-testing, and then you're looking at that and you're addressing it, using that. I know what you do. People can listen to season 1 if they want to know what you're doing.
Right.
It's like, in a dream world, what could we be doing with that class time? That's the question. Do you want me to say some more before you respond at all with what's off the top of your head?
Let's go top of head.
Yeah.
Don't say more.
You are catching me. I will say this. You are catching me at a really interesting moment in time. So I think we can have this conversation. I think that this could potentially turn into probably a whole other podcast, perhaps another season, because of the semester that we have had at Missouri State. And my guess is this is probably reflective of what's happened around the country this semester.
Tell us more.
And so we've had a really, really difficult semester at Missouri State. And I think that this is what we are seeing is probably, I'm going to call it the post-COVID fallout. That's not to say that we are post-COVID, but this is we are getting the pretty traditional student population, people who were in high school at the height of when COVID hit. And we are getting these students now who are coming to college extremely underprepared academically and psychologically for college in an extent that I have never seen before in the 20 years that I've been teaching.
Yep.
So this semester has been really different. So when you're asking me this question about what should we be doing with our class time, my answer to this question right now is probably a little different than it may have ever been in the past.
Yep.
And so I'm not sure how you want me to answer that. Like, do you want me to answer that like I would have answered it a year ago?
No,
or like
no.
right now?
I think it's where we are right now.
Because we're all here right now. So
right.
Yeah.
I mean, Regan, you said that class attendance, just our sensitivity to students being out ill and are accommodating for that. All those kinds of things are things that have changed for you as well. So,
right.
Danae, is that some of what you're seeing?
Certainly. I mean, certainly there is that. To me, those are minor things, honestly, that we can accommodate and deal with. But I'm talking more of like, and again, we're talking scale here, right? When you're dealing with 330 students. So the number of mental health crises that we saw this semester, and just feeling like, as an individual instructor, like, and I'm a clinical psychologist. So in some ways I do feel equipped to deal with that, but not having the support to deal with that and all the other academic things and taking care of the day-to-day kinds of things I need to do for my class. So part of what we need to be teaching is self-care.
Yep.
And some of the things that my students found the most helpful in my class this semester was teaching them about the importance of sleep and a regular, why a regular sleep schedule is important and what kinds of things sleep deprivation causes and the impact of that and how it affects their stress management and things like that. So these, when we go back to IPI kinds of things and talk about like how these kinds of psychological principles can affect their daily lives and help improve their lives, those kinds of things are really coming out as important, and teaching them kinds of daily living skills. Things like, we often and always have taught them about study skills and how to study effectively. But we're having to have conversations now just about basic reading, like basic reading level kinds of things, like not just about how to study, but the fact that you actually do have to read, like the most basic things that I've never really had to talk about before, that they're not doing, that they don't actually think that they really have to do and don't understand because they didn't have to do it in high school because they were given the message during COVID of just do what you need to do to get by, which is what we all kind of lived by. And so I'm not blaming anybody. It wasn't the teacher's fault. It wasn't anybody's fault. It was just this inherent message that they got, which was do what you need to do to get through. And the implicit message in that was, if you cheat, it's okay. No one's going to say anything about it. And so we had a massive cheating problem this semester.
Okay.
So there's so many things like that. Like we had to do a lot of education about academic integrity that they just don't internalize as wrong.
Yeah. Yeah.
So these are the things that we need to be teaching. It has nothing to do with intro psych content.
Well, it does. It does and it doesn't. But go ahead,
right?
Regan. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I was going to say, I think on one hand, I think we are fortunate in psychology and especially intro psych, where many of these topics, and Danae, when you talked about sleep, I think looking back at my term, that week that we talked about sleep and got to go into these kind of things were, some of the most active class sessions as people explored issues with that. But of course, many of these things, sleep and study skills, and I think we more traditionally think about the memory chapter and the cognitive skills. But even even if somebody doesn't cover health psych, it's those other life behavior things, right?
Yeah.
So that's, I think, great. But there's also this notion of, to a large extent, I think scale is a problem, right? And I think when Garth is structuring his new 33-person class, right there, having that time for community building, because, one of my, all the way from grad school, social support and social support development, was something I looked at really closely, and providing ways for students to interact is such a big deal because, I was reading over my student comments from the term, and a number of them said, in terms of what could have helped, a number of them said a smaller class so that I could get to meet my classmates more. Mm. And that yearning for being able to interact with others. And I think, Garth, it sounds like not just in the past, but even coming up front, you are building in a lot of those opportunities for interaction, right?
Yeah. I have one question before I address kind of what I'm thinking about doing for my classes. But if either of you, because you both teach large sections, let me throw this to you, Danae. If you had a magic wand and your class sections were all of a sudden 33, I know that's logistics, my nightmare doesn't work, whatever. Right. If it was, how would you approach your class time with your students? Based on what we're talking about.
I mean, that's such a great question, and something I'd obviously need a lot of time to think about because I've really never taught intro psych in that way. I certainly would have a lot of discussion. I mean, I would really use it in probably in a discussion kind of way with some, I think I'd still do a flipped kind of model. I mean, that's kind of the model that I gravitate toward, where they do a lot of the reading and the quizzing outside of class, and then use the class time for some of that really relationship building, I think, and group work. And because I think I am really interested to hear what you're planning, because we tried to, even in our really large class, to build in some small group study groups and things like that. But what I found, what my experience was, especially this semester, is even when we did that, their go-to was to do things like log into the study session, turn off their camera, walk away, and leave their computer running just so they could get the credit.
Yeah.
So all the things that we would put in there to try to help them to build community, to provide extra support, they would just do it to get the grade. So you have to scaffold it in a way that is really not just about getting the grade, but giving them, like what Regan's saying, giving them that sense of community so that they really feel like they're getting something out of it. So that's how I would try to take that small class and really structure it that way.
Yep. I would have been the student who would have shut off my screen and gone and done something else. 100%. I was just doing continuing education for my my license here in Washington State, and I couldn't believe how bad. I just couldn't believe how bad the classes were. And I mean, we're teachers, right? So, and we love teaching, but I'm like, I did basically the equivalent of shutting off my screen because it was that bad. And so, maybe this is the quality of education too, that our students are used to getting and not being engaged. I don't know. We thankfully we have psychology. And so it's the bar. What does Jane always say? Like, if you make psychology boring, I don't know how she finishes that, but you can imagine. Now, Regan, to your question, like, what am I going to be doing in class? Here's one of the things that, so in my career, I have always erred on the side of, I don't even know if this is the right way to say it. I'm just going to say it and then whatever, of too rigorous, of too much work, of maybe catering to the students who were more academic or more prepared. Okay. So that's kind of how I was, early on. And then the last, I would say, 7 years or so, I've really tried to do that differently. Now, coming back from pandemic and from this sabbatical and just changing my course, I have decided that I am going to have I'm flipping. So I'm not going to have I'm going to have my students read ahead of time, do some quizzing in my learning management system or whatever. And then once they get to class, and this is different, before I would have them do assignments, class is one thing, but then there are also assignments, and then there is, probably a lot of writing before they get into class. I just axed all that. Whatever they're going to do for learning after they have that basic foundation, they're going to do in class, and it's putting the burden back on me to create a dynamic, like very thoughtful each class session, just to make it engaging. Building community. I still need to think about what those values are. I'm writing these down, like building community. But it's going to be active. They may not be, prior, I used to use questions like short answer questions, Danae, before students get into my course, and they do a lot of writing. They probably write 1,000 words before they 500 to 1,000 words before they get into the class or something like that. And what I am doing now is basically none of that. I will do some of that in class. So that's kind of, I don't know what that is, but I'm taking the learning out. And there is this part of me that just says, well, you're kind of letting them off the hook. I can't get rid of that voice that just says, you're kind of letting them off the hook. I don't know.
Well, it's a good time to do that, because if you were planning to have them write before class, they will now just have Chat GPT do it beforehand. That's right. So, writing in class is a better idea. And
if people haven't heard of that, they need to go Google it right now and
Absolutely.
Look it up, because it's crazy. It's GPT,
wild,
right?
GPT, I think.
Yeah, GPT.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
I didn't even
crazy tech. Yeah. It's pretty cool, but not for us.
No.
So, yes.
Although I'm going to maybe get it to write my syllabus for me.
That should be interesting. I just have to share one comment that I got from a colleague who said, a colleague, mind you, I tried ChatGPT out, and one of the biggest advantages to it is, instead of staring at a blank sheet of paper, you just give it a prompt and it gives you something to start on. So you're no longer sitting at a blank sheet of paper, it's getting you started, and then you take over. And I'm like, yeah, that's a really optimistic take on it. But,
That's true. Yeah. It really does then blur the lines, though, on like what is your work and what isn't.
Right.
At that point. Yeah.
Where do you start and the AI end?
Yeah.
Well, yeah. So that's why I think that class time is going to be very valuable for learning. And I haven't thought, I was, the online right now, I'm thinking a lot about my face-to-face class. When online, it's going to be a whole different conversation.
Mm-hmm.
But I think I'm going to give students, and, I'm saying these things because I don't think I've ever fully committed to active learning class sessions where we're just doing stuff. In fact, I have found the resources up until this point in my career completely overwhelming to go onto STP resource page, or to search through Facebook, or even project assessment. There's just so much available out there.
Yeah.
Anyway.
I honestly, Garth, if I was in your position right now, I think I might even want to take a class where I would literally go through the chapter. I would do a flip class, and I would assign the chapter and the quizzes beforehand. And then in class, I would actually go through the chapter as if like we would start from scratch. Like, this is how I would recommend you read a chapter. Like, what does it mean to read and study a chapter? Like, let's brainstorm. Like, let's everyone talk about, what did you do to do your homework this week? What does that look like? Because I've had some of these comments this semester with students, and they say, well, I spent a lot of time. I looked at all the bolded words and I read the chapter. And I would say, what do you mean by read? Yeah. Like, I've never thought to actually ask this before. And they say, I looked at all the bolded words.
So that was the reading? Yeah.
That was the reading. And they were proud of that. And the reason I started asking this question is because in Revel, you can look at time on task. And so I would notice that they're all getting 100% on their quizzes. Yet the time on task for the amount of time in the chapter, which should take them hours, it should take hours, they were spending 15 to 30 minutes per chapter. And then I would say, but what are you doing in the chapter? They would say, well, I'm reading. And I would say, what do you mean by that? And they'd say, I'm looking at each of the bolded words. And they would just read the definition of the bolded words. And I would say, that is not reading. That is not what we mean by reading.
So Danae, let me push you on that just a little bit, because this is actually a really interesting thing that Garth and I were kicking around. To some extent, I want to pick up on what you just said. They're taking the quizzes and getting 100%, but they're only reading 30 minutes, right? Mm-hmm. And I guess I'm not pushing it at all, but I'm making an observation, which is, for so many, the indicator is they're getting 100%. Why should you care how much they're reading, right? And you and I know why we care, but so much of higher ed is set up so that, look, you got 100%. The best way you can get to that 100%, take it.
Say that last part again, Regan. The best.
So, way? I mean, if you can find the best way you can get that 100%, why don't you take it? And it's very much like what you did with the study groups, right? It's great to create those study groups, but folks have found a way to get those points without getting it.
But Regan, the way they're getting that 100% is by going on Quizlet and just looking at what other people did. They're cheating. Like, that's the way they're getting it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
If they were actually getting it by speed reading, finding the answer, and actually answering the questions, I would actually be okay with that, because they're still seeking out the information.
Yeah, it's retrieval practice or whatever, right? Yeah,
exactly.
If they're doing it right.
I mean, they're still finding the information, but they're not. They're finding it on Course Hero. Okay. They're finding it on Quizlet.
Well, now this is opening a can for me, because now, is there any safe pre-assigned work to class?
No, absolutely not.
So then why are we doing this?
Because you have to have something out there for the few students who really truly want to learn.
Yeah.
Right.
There are some.
Exactly.
There are some, and you have to provide that environment for them. And I talk to them, the entire class, about this. I tell them, I know the answers are out there.
Yeah.
And this is up to you. And the reality is, my class did horrible on exams. Mm-hmm. And ultimately, they know this. And then they say, I don't understand why I'm doing horrible. And I say, I do. I know exactly why you're doing horrible. And I show them the data. And they still blame the class, right? Like, I mean, the kinds of things that have been going around our university about this particular class, about our class this semester, we are, for the most part, the only class that gave an in-class cumulative final for most of my students. I mean, everyone else is stuck with online open book exams. I mean, we are the class at the university that is known as the hardest class right now, because we kind of went back to these kinds of standards.
Okay, so I'm just thinking about a couple things. Just going back, the reason we would give pre-class meeting assessments, reading assessments, is because we know how learning works. Yes. And if somebody is following our system,
yes,
if they're willing to do it and to be coached in it, taught through that system, they will develop the skills they need to develop in our courses, right?
Yes, we know
as far
that.
as reading. Okay. So, but okay, then they come to class. I'm 33 people, right?
Yep.
You cannot avoid, if you have 4 hours, you have 4 hours a week with me in an 11-week quarter. You have 4 hours a week. You can't cheat experiences, right? You really can't. Not at least not as easily. You can't
Right.
cheat. You're going to do we're going to do a, oh my goodness, I can't even think of an activity right now, but we're going to do this activity and then you are going to a jigsaw. Okay. You're going to learn something and then you're going to switch groups and then you're going to teach it to somebody else, or you're going to learn something with a group and then you're all going to present it. You just can't. You can't fudge that as much. You're building skills whether you like it or not.
Right.
Okay. Right.
Which is great. That's what's great about having 33 students.
Yep. Yeah. Well,
But
thank you.
You know what you also have the opportunity to do, and this is just kind of depends on how much you really want to dig in, is you really have the chance to engage in differential instruction. You really have the chance to figure
absolutely.
out who are the students who are really taking this seriously. Because what I was just thinking of is if I was that student who I was doing my reading and I wasn't on Quizlet and I was taking those quizzes seriously and I came to your class and I was sitting there listening to someone like me going, well, this is how I would read the chapter for like an hour, I'd be like, no, I don't want to listen to that because I know how to do that.
Yeah.
Right. That would be frustrating to me. But knowing that half the class needs that, they need that, but maybe a small percentage doesn't. I would rather be in the writing group. I would want to be in the group that is given some writing prompt and is challenged to do some kind of writing technique or something like that, like is doing something else that's more kind of at that level. Whereas then there's the other group that might need some more instruction on like how to read a textbook, right? Because part of this is not just that they don't want to. I think they don't know how to.
Mm.
So I just have to ask real quick, Danae, do you think one solution, and I can immediately think of an issue, but one solution is doing that how to read aloud kind of thing, but recording it for those who need it so that, I mean, that's one way of getting at the differential, right? You say, look, here are all these little things you can pick depending on what you need. Now, I know the comeback is, but then those who really need it may not do that extra bit. And you gain a lot from doing it in class. But what do you think? Is there a balance in there someplace?
When you say record it, do you mean like make like a video and put it in Canvas or something?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think they're not going to do it.
Yeah.
That's the problem, right?
Yeah.
What we want is students who want to learn. I'm sorry, I was the student who didn't want to learn. I was a bad student. I didn't know how to be a student. And I was more motivated by things outside of the classroom. I rarely found an instructor who really captivated me or topics, honestly. So yeah, one of my plans, and this is really inspired by kind of realizing that there is no correct way to teach intro psych. I'm glad we have the outcomes. That's good. So that kind of that's a foundation for making decisions. But other than that, I hope that for those students who are interested, that the hook of psychology can make your life better. That this will be I hate to say it, for some of them, this will be a self-help course. Literally.
Yes,
yeah.
for sure.
And why not use that for such a good purpose in our students' lives, that especially at a time like this. I do have one final question for you, both of you, actually. I know there's research on it. I know we are now post-pandemic. Cumulative finals, what do we think? You've just brought them back, Danae. You all weren't doing them for a bit, is that right?
We weren't during the pandemic, no.
Okay. What do we think? I was leaning towards no cumulative final in my course.
So as Danae nods and reflects, I'm going to introduce in my answer a curveball, which for the dying minutes of this conversation clearly sets up part two, which is yes on cumulative, but speaking of data, the data on open book untimed exams is pretty compelling. So, Danae, you said y'all went back to in-person kind of exams. We do online open book, but timed. And I think there's a really interesting data on pros and cons of that. So I think on cumulative in my book, there's no debate. People study differently for cumulative. People also study differently for open book versus not. But by virtue of the timing, they still have to study because they couldn't just look things up. But yeah, the cumulative, I think that seems that it's pretty solid in terms of a good way to go.
Yeah.
I agree on the cumulative. I'll agree with Regan on that. I totally agree with that. Regan, when you say open book, are you talking about written answers or are you talking multiple choice?
Multiple choice. So they get a few minutes more than the number of questions. And if they want to refer to notes or the book, they can.
Yeah, I'm going to totally disagree on that one. Okay. We just have different experiences on that. We have 2 years of data of doing open book exam, open book, open note exam, multiple choice exams. And I can show you the data on our grade distributions from 2 years of data doing that, where it was mostly A's and B's in our course. And the average grade on exams was, I don't know, I'm going to guess it was about an 85. And this semester, I bet my average grade on exams, now they weren't the same questions, but they were all multiple choice, but they were, similar. Average grade was probably 68.
Not open book.
Not open
note. Yeah. Okay.
So they just search it. I mean, because we have a electronic book. Yeah. Right. So they just search
Control
the answer.
F and there you go.
I mean, the grade distributions are vastly different, which is part of the issue why there's such a culture shock right now with our course. So people are saying things like, boy, I'm sure glad I took that course during the pandemic.
Right. Well, okay. And I know, I'm going to guess that 90% of your assessment, your cumulative multiple choice final exam assessment is content based.
Yeah.
And so isn't that putting a whole lot of weight on content, which is just one of our 3 IPI outcomes, right? And so this is where I'm leading to my own situation, which is a cumulative final for me. Well, content knowledge is a very quick way, or whatever. It's a definitive way to figure out, do they know it? Do they not know it?
Yeah.
It's a fine measure for that. But then you have the integrative themes, and then you have the critical thinking piece, and then we get to this thing, which we get back to all the time, which is how much can we actually do in this course meaningfully, right? Mm-hmm. How much can we actually do?
Well, but I think there's one more thing too, because Danae, actually, I would not debate in any way the fact that the distributions are different. No doubt. I have no doubt about that. I've got that data too. But my thought, which I don't have data for, and boy, if you do, this would be super, is does it make a difference 1 year later or 2 years later on whether they took a cumulative test online or on paper, open book or closed book? And I think that's the bigger question for me. It's not so much the distribution, right? But it's in one of these two cases, are they learning better? If they're not stressed, now this is putting the cheating part aside, okay? Mm-hmm. Because clearly there's more likelihood for cheating in one case than the other. So I'm totally putting the cheating thing aside. But the big intellectual question that I'm really struggling with is, so what if it's a tougher exam? Does that translate them to that learning it better and longer? And I don't think we've got the data on that.
That is a really good question. And let me just add another question to that, because as you research this question, I also want you to think about this. What are the implications for the future for the students then who take the exam, that where they just are able to easily look up the answers and they end up with an A in this course, where they were able to just search the answers and believe that they have left this course and are an A student? And they go forward into the next course where they don't have that option to look up answers for exams. And what implications does that have for them going forward? Because that's what we have dealt with this year. The number of students that I have seen come from high school in my office say to me, but I'm an A student.
Yep.
Because they all received A's when they were in high school during the pandemic. And it is really awkward to have to say to them, I actually don't think you are.
Yeah.
Right.
Like,
right.
you're not performing as an A student. You're not. And you, like, how do you have that conversation? And so I feel like we are doing our students a disservice by allowing them this modality to get these kinds of grades that they may not maintain their learning gains. And it's actually giving them a false sense of these abilities to carry on in the future, in future courses. So there's a follow-up question for you.
Okay, so I need to review this convoluted term that I'm about to use, but it's authentic assessment, because I think I've heard it defined in many different ways. But I think in the case that I am hearing right now is, or thinking about right now based on this conversation is authentic in terms of authentic, which is actually assessing. Direct assessment of knowledge, skills, and abilities, right? Not if we don't have control over the environment, we don't quite know what we're assessing, right? We might be assessing students' abilities to cheat, right? Instead of actually convey, knowledge correctly. Or, but I think, I'm also doubling down on activities in class. I'm doubling down on, I don't know what else I'm doubling down on. I'm doubling down on activities in class, active learning stuff in the classroom. You all are talking and I keep thinking, have I been seeing this stuff at the community college level for more years than what you've been seeing it at the 4-year level? I'm not sure, because some of it sounds pretty familiar. Like, we've had these conversations pre-pandemic with lots of students. The student who, I understand things have changed. I'm not trying to say that, community college instructors are super unique, but maybe different students to some extent. There's lots to think about here. I'm going to keep my pre-course reading and quizzes. I'm going to keep it. I'm going to say it again, doubling down on what I'm doing in class, and it's going to be active. And then my end of week assessments, I think I'm settling in on those short answer written assessments. It's the final that I haven't figured out, but I've got lots to think about from this conversation. So any final departing words, Danae?
Well, just based on what you said there, it sounds like you have lots of different ways that you are going to be able to gather grades, like different ways of assessing knowledge and skills.
Yeah.
And I think you can't go wrong with that, right? So you're going to have a class size that is going to allow you to do that.
That's
and
right.
You are going to give students lots of opportunities to show you their strengths. So I think that's really good. Like, I think if we go into a course and we think about it in a very student-centered way, like, how can I design this course so that you can show me what you know and where your strengths are? Let me give you lots of opportunities. So if presentations aren't your strengths, let me give you an opportunity to show me how you write. If that's not your strength, let me give you an opportunity to show me how much you know, if you're really good at tests. And if that's not your strength, let me give you an opportunity to work in a group and be a leader. So you have lots of different ways to assess. That's one of the downsides of having a class the size that Regan and I do, is we're really hemmed in to like have these limited ways of assessing. And it's one of the least favorite things that I do of like just having this kind of limited way to have to really be kind of focused on content in terms of assessment, multiple choice tests, not being able to do a lot of writing. So I would love to have a class that size to be able to do all those kinds of different kinds of assessments. So I think if you're doing that, like, it's going to be fun too. Like, you're going to have lots of different ways of grading things. And I think your students are going to feel like they have lots of opportunities to, if they don't do so well on one thing, they've got a chance to make it up somewhere else.
I'm realizing as you're saying it, and I feel my anxiety rising, that it should be fun, but it's also, there's something in me that just likes maybe what you all have, which is a system that can that is the
I'll
same.
try to make you feel better.
I know, but I feel this thing in me that it's like I like a system that's reliable, and I don't know. So it seems like in my mind I am creating, let's say, 40 hours of class time, 50 hours of class time that I really want to be dynamic and engaged. And I know what that's going to cost me to create that. And it's not like I have none. I'm not starting from scratch, but it's going to be a heck of a lot of work.
Well, and I would be gentle with yourself too. Like, you don't have to do it. You don't have to do 40 perfect hours in one semester, right? You have time to kind of perfect this over time. So,
Yeah.
Step by step, one bite at a time, one variation at a time.
That this is your clinical skills. My old Jungian psychologist would have said, "Oh yes, you are going to fall into a complex here." All right, my friends, thank you, Danae, for taking the time. And I really appreciate your perspectives from the big class. And, I really appreciate what you do with your students. It's just so different than what I do. But you've got a lot to teach me. So thanks for the time.